Welcome back. So my name is Reshla Laviva, and I am the director of tabletop panels at DragonCon. And I am a professional game master as well as an award-winning game master. With me today is Abby and Sean. I will let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Abby. I'm one of the volunteers with DragonCon Tabletop, and I run a few games. And apparently, I'm a budding game designer now because I've been putting something together for my friends. So that's new on my repertoire.
Hey, every DM is a budding game designer. So
I was like,
I
huh,
fully support this tag. I'm Sean. I have been involved with RPGs for a really long time. Run at DragonCon for many years. I don't think I've won as many awards as Rush have, but I have won a few. I spent a lot of time primarily writing for the RPGA, but I have also written for various print products for mostly D&D over the years.
Okay, so today
I still think of myself as a budding game designer. So
for sure. I've worked with Sean on some of the things that he's designed, so I would definitely agree with that. So today we're going to be talking about how to run and play pre-written adventures. And what is interesting is when I go on the internet, especially YouTube, I do not see a lot on this topic at all, which is kind of interesting. And even though this was one of our most requested topics. So when you're talking about running a pre-written adventure, I will talk about the appeal of it in just a minute. But there are two main things that we're going to be talking about, which is running a module, which should run in about 4 hours. That what I mean is by something like, for say, the Adventurers League. If you play in a convention, modules have to fit within a certain time limit. If you're playing at home, obviously, it doesn't have to fit that time limit specifically. But it's a definitely beginning, middle, and end. It's a one-shot standalone adventure. And we'll be talking about that in a little bit. And after that, we'll talk about just a adventure like you might buy at your friendly local game store. So something like an adventure path that Paizo is very famous for, or something like that, like the Sunless Citadel. So real quick, the appeal of running a pre-written adventure. There's a lot of appeal to both writing your own stuff and running that, or writing a pre-written adventure. Of course, the appeal of a pre-written adventure is I didn't have to do all this work. It's all done for me. So, for example, one of the adventure paths I'm running right now is the Mummy's Mask, written for Pathfinder by Paizo. The Mummy's Mask has an enormous amount of background information that I didn't have to write. And I can just read it. And so when the players kind of go off the path, I know what is going to be in the city and what sort of things they might encounter. So there's that appeal. Another appeal is I run into a lot of people who are the game master, but frankly, they're not the best creative writer, and that's okay. They might have strengths in other places. And that's not only okay, that's a blessing. It's a save. It's something really, really nice if you are not the best adventure writer, because someone else has done it for you. And then another appeal of it is, and I was describing this to one of my players earlier, is that part of the magic of role-playing games is that it's a collaborative storytelling effort between you and the players. But there's this third intercessor. It's not just a back and forth two-way street. There's the third intercessor, which is the dice. The dice may determine that you go up to the big bad guy and you swing your sword, and actually you miss. You don't actually hit. But with a module, sometimes there can be a fourth intercessor. So the module might say, if the player characters happen to cast this spell at this time and this place, then this special thing happens. And lo and behold, they do it, and you're like, wow. Well, it says that this special thing happens. Or they go off the written path, and the module has written in it, hey, if they go off the path, which is unlikely, but if they do, there's this surprise over here. Mm-hmm. And what you have also, which is kind of fun, is you have the module to fall back on. So players cannot try to, hang you up by a thin string and be like, how dare you do that? You were a cheater. No, the module specifically says if you leave the castle, then 1,000 wolves descend upon you and try to rip you apart. That's look right, So you have something that you're like, I didn't do it. So there's a fourth intercessor in the storytelling that can often lead to wonderful shenanigans.
Yes, shenanigans is a good word for it. Rocks fall, everyone dies. I
Right.
do think that any writer who says if the players go off the beaten path, which is very unlikely, has not met very many actual players, because
Right,
going off the beaten path is kind of what players do.
Yep.
But I agree with all of that. I think there is kind of an unwritten sense that many newer DMs have in particular, which is that it is somehow less or that it's bad to run other people's adventures. It makes you less of a DM. And I just want to emphasize that is absolutely not the case. Some people love world building. Some people love coming up with elaborate plots and death trap dungeons. Some people just like to play D&D or any other RPG. And the most important thing is you get together with a group of people and you have something to play and you have a good time. And so if using a pre-written adventure enables you to do that more often or with less prep, because like everybody, you have a busy life, you should never feel bad about doing that. That doesn't make your group any less. It doesn't make you any less as a game master. It's just one more source. If you go to a movie and you get inspired by the movie and you adapt some elements of the plot that you saw in the movie into a cool scene in your next game, it's exactly the same thing. The more adventures you read, even if you don't run them, just reading them shows you how do different people approach the idea. How many different ways are there to get the party in the adventure in the first place? How many different ways are there for the villain to unfold, their master scheme? How many different ways are there to set up a random encounter? How many different ways are there to deal with failure? What happens if the party doesn't achieve their goals? And so even if you don't set out with a goal of I'm going to run this thing verbatim, just being a connoisseur, a reader of other people's adventures becomes more fodder that you'll use in your own games. So
yeah. All art is borrowed, and especially as a new GM, reading modules, reading pre-made games like that will help you sort of like figure out all the different ways things can go, but also like, okay, I need to have these things in here because I think that's interesting. It'll present ideas that maybe you didn't think about because you were only focused on making combat enemies and not like role play enemies.
Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe you love elaborate social set pieces, but you're not great at putting combat encounters together. The one thing you can bet is that most published adventures will have plenty of combat encounters for you to pick and choose from.
Yeah. And like I guarantee that every single one of the most seasoned GMs out there has been like, you know what? I don't feel like it. Lost Minds of Phandelver it is.
Absolutely. Right. And there's a continuity there. I mean, how many folks that are old school gamers have fond, memories of the Tomb of Horrors or the Keep on the Borderlands or the Ghost Tower of Inverness? And Phandelver is like that for 5th edition. There is a sense that you're part of the bigger community because we've all played some of these tentpole touchstone adventures.
We've all started Lost Minds of Phandelver and none of us have finished it.
Exactly. In 4E, there was the very first adventure path that had an elite goblin that TPK'd massive numbers of people. Almost nobody, in talking to people, almost nobody actually finished that adventure. They all got to this encounter in the cave with this one goblin and they all got wiped out. But it's still a great story.
Yeah.
Right. No, I really like how you said that the continuity, like you can talk about remember whens with other people that help foster this community. So as I said before, there are two really different kind of pre-written adventures we're talking about. One is like a module for something like Adventures League or Pathfinder Society or whatnot. Another is something like you would buy at the store. So we'll talk about modules real quick because both Sean and I have a lot of experience doing that. A lot of times if you're running at a convention, it has to run within a certain time period. And that certain time period is usually 4 hours, unless you're doing something like at a Gen Con where it's games on demand. So, but even then, there's sort of this expectation of like, 2 to 4 hours, right? So you have to, with that, you have to be cognizant of your time. Usually modules like that are broken down into encounters, like anywhere from 4 to 6 encounters, or actually really more like 6 to 8 encounters. And so when you look at your certain encounters, you're looking at the clock, like, okay, I should be here at this point of the time, this time slot, I need to be here. And most people, most GMs that are very experienced, when they're given a 4-hour time slot, they really try to get it done in about 3 hours, maybe 3 hours and 15 minutes, because they want to allow time for people to come, sit down. People have come in late. They need to go to the bathroom. They need to have a break. Maybe they're eating something. And then back in the day, you would score your judge. You had to leave time for scoring the judge. So you honestly had to cram it in there in shorter than 4 hours.
Yeah, and even without the table voting that we used to do, if it is an organized play program, there may be paperwork. The players may need adventure records or certificates or something like that, and you want to have time just to decompress a little bit from the end of the adventure too. And so I always say you're going to start 15 minutes late, and you absolutely want to end no more than 15 minutes early, and preferably 30 minutes early. If nothing else, people have to get to their next game. And so, yeah, you're usually aiming for 3 hours and 15 minutes plus or minus. And so what I'll do is I'll take the adventure and I'll kind of X-ray it and say, okay, I want to make sure the worst thing that can happen in that kind of an environment is you run out of time and you are nowhere near the end. If you run out of time and you're near the end, there are some things you can do to kind of accelerate that final encounter, which is usually a combat encounter, to make sure that it ends on a high note. But if you're in the middle of the 3rd scene out of 7 and you're out of time, you're in trouble. And so you want to really kind of X-ray that adventure up front and say, okay, what are the big story beats? I've got to make sure that we've got some rising action, a climax, and ideally a little bit of falling action, but that can be truncated with a little bit of narration at the end. But what are the things that absolutely have to happen in order for this adventure to be a success? And then I just, kind of make some notes to myself real quick. Okay, I want to be about here when we're an hour in. I want to be about here when we're 2 hours in. And if we're not here by the time we're 2.5 hours in, I'm going to be working on the fly to kind of route around some of those other encounters to make sure we get to the what's the really most exciting thing. Make sure we get to that.
I really like the way you put that, and that's something that helped me in my game mastering career, was that because I had to be so cognizant of time and how much encounters took place, I had to be way more mindful of how I ran a game. I had to be way more mindful of combat and made sure combat didn't take too long, that it kept going really fast. Yeah. And so that increased mindfulness helped me as a game master, generally speaking.
Yeah, and in a convention setting in particular, a willingness to call a combat. Most game systems, there is a point where it's obvious who's going to win, but you still have 2 or 3 more rounds of people chucking dice at each other to finish off the last few enemies or whatnot. Developing a sense.
God forbid they all roll ones, and then
exactly. And now all of a sudden everybody's dice go cold, and now we're just trying to mop up the minions. So having the monsters surrender, having the monsters flee, be willing to call a combat and kind of narrate the last couple rounds, because that'll save you 15 minutes on every encounter right there.
I've talked about Dragon Age a lot, but they do have a morale roll that you can do. So like once enemies get to like half, they can roll morale, and if they roll low, they're like, I'm out of here, baby, I'm gone. Yeah, and I love that's like mechanically built in.
Absolutely, and it just makes sense. Like most creatures are not there to fight to the death.
Right.
They want to live to fight another day. And so.
So very quickly, that's when the first time I ran into people, like you said, Sean, narrating, where it was like, okay, we are really behind. There was a lot of good role playing, but there are several encounters that you have to go through. I'm going to narrate, and then why don't you narrate to me what happened in that encounter, right? Like, so you go to the swamp and this happens. How do you solve this problem? And then like, okay, and then the people narrate what their characters do, and they're like, all right, we're moving on to the next thing. So that was the first time I'd ever seen that done. Because again, you're at a convention, you're obligated to finish the module. A lot of times because they're magical items or very important story points at the end of that module, that if the people playing it don't finish, they miss a really important story point. And maybe it's, let's say, the next module in that same convention, they're lost. Wait, what? The guy's alive? Yeah, he came back in that module. He faked his death. We didn't. Oh, that's the game we didn't play. Oh my god. So
that was like me watching Game of Thrones, because whenever Oberyn died, spoilers for anyone who didn't keep up with it already. But yeah, like whenever he died, I was like, wait, what? And I was already like watching the next season. I think I had skipped that scene because I was like, oh, this is about to go south. I don't want to see this get gross. And so I just completely skipped it. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't realize he had died. And I was like, oh no, I missed it. And I had to like go back and, see the whole nastiness. And I was like, okay, well, I'm glad I missed it. But also, whoopsies.
That has actually happened to me on both sides of the screen. That has actually happened to me where I'm like, wait, what? And then people had to like tell me, break it down what happened. I'm like, oh.
Yeah,
I didn't, anyway.
I did the same thing with the opening scene in Crimson Peak. Told my sister, it's not that bad. And she was like, that was so scary. And I was like, what are you talking about?
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think in addition to the continuity concern, I mean, at conventions, you might be playing your own one-shot that is not part of any ongoing continuity, or you might be playing something that's part of a storyline or a whole season or a whole campaign. But for the players and for yourself, you want to end on a definite note of finality anyway. Because you're probably not going to see that group of people exactly with those characters at that table ever again, even if you go to a lot of conventions. And so you want a story to have a satisfying and definite conclusion. And so and what you don't want is the players are packing up their stuff and you're reading the last 12 paragraphs of box text to them while they're doing it, right? That's nobody remembers that, and it's just not a good way to end the game. And so I'm perfectly willing to cut whole encounters out if that's what it takes to make sure we get to the end, as long as there wasn't anything in those encounters that they needed to understand what was going on. It's like, well, we need the 3 ancient talismans to take down the treant at the heart of the corrupted wood. Probably I'm not going to skip the 3 encounters where you get the 3 ancient talismans, or that last part's not going to make a lot of sense. But as you described, Rush, we may find them theater of the mind very, very quickly, just to make sure that we have the time for that last encounter to breathe.
You just find one on the road. Someone just dropped it. No biggie. It's this like sacred object. It's no problem. Whatever. It's there.
You find these things from time to time. Yeah.
Someone thought it was garbage.
You did leave a forwarding address at the tavern. I mean, we just, guy with a sack just shows up and here you go, mail call.
That's right. It was FedEx to you. One of the advantages actually of a module like that has to be run within a certain time period and it has to have certain things that happen, is that I remember before I had children, I would prep a module weeks in advance. I would rehearse what I would say in each encounter. I would rehearse descriptions. I would rehearse NPCs. On the way down to a convention, everybody wanted to, I had friends who wanted to hitch a ride with me. I'm like, no, I'm afraid you can't do that. I have to drive down by myself. Like, what?
Once you're ready for it to get real weird.
Yeah, exactly. Because driving, I would practice the voices in my car. And I didn't want anybody else there because, it would be real, real weird. Mm-hmm. But that helped my GMing career because it helped me hone those skills and hone prep. Because one of the advantages is exactly what's going to happen in that encounter. Now, obviously, the players are going to go off the rails, but you at least know what the first 25% of that encounter is going to be. Mm-hmm. And also, it helps you prep for the unexpected because you've rehearsed this NPC and you've gotten inside their brain. They're like, oh, okay, you decided to flee instead of fight. Well, Bob the Lich is going to probably do this if you flee. Like, he'll pack up and go home. He has no interest in fighting you. Or, no, he's really bent on revenge. He will chase you, whatever. So yeah, that also helps you with those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a GM in that situation, you want to sort of measure your investment in prep relative. If you're going to run the adventure 6 times at the convention, there's a much bigger payoff to investing in more prep. Or if it's something like an epic, where 45 tables are going to be playing at the same time, and that's going to be like the capstone of the whole convention, there's a really big return. But even basic stuff like having your monster stats ready to go, having a couple personality traits jotted down for each NPC, having a flow chart of the encounters if one wasn't provided in the adventure. Those are not things that take hours and hours and hours to do necessarily ahead of time, but they can save you minutes and minutes and minutes at the table. And those little things add up quickly. Look at your game system. Does your game system have clunky mechanical bits that take a long time to adjudicate? I used to show up with a page of pre-roll D20 results just so I could say, boom, 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 boom. I'm crossing numbers off of the sheet because I know that this adventure is really, really tight to fit in the time. I'm going to use average damage for the monsters because that saves me having to roll dice. The players go nuts. The players are you want them to have the joy of rolling that crit and chucking 27 D6s across the table. But for you as the game master, just those little things that you can do to save a few minutes in that time slot, they really do add up. And as you said, those are great. Those skills don't just work in a convention setting. Those skills work in your home game. Those skills work anywhere you're going to play a game, because at the end of the day, the players are not going to remember that you were crossing numbers off of a sheet. They're going to remember the amazing thing that happened during the game. And the more you can create the opportunity for those moments to have the time that they need to bloom, the more likely they are to happen. So
yeah. I know whenever I run games, I shoot for running for about 2 hours, especially like online, because I don't want to sit at my computer for longer than 2 hours, really. Like, that's just me personally. I don't like to do that. So when I moved from like thinking 4 hours was standard to like, oh, I can do this in 2, there's so much I did. It's like, okay, let's nix that. Okay, let's cut that roll. Like, so many things I did to just like shave off minutes that weren't really that necessary.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. One of the things the Adventurers League, I think, did well was they introduced the idea that a 2-hour adventure was, because prior to that, the standard was 4 to 5. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we were moving in the direction of having a lot of what we called 2-rounders, which were really like 7 to 8.
Yeah.
And so having the ability to run an adventure in 2 hours and make it fun for everybody is enormous.
Now, I haven't done a lot of Adventurers League. When did that shift happen?
We had started doing like 1 hour. There was a sub genre of adventures called a delve that was basically intended to take an hour. And then when there would be new storyline seasons, Sean Merwin was the master of this, would write like a block of 4 1-hour mini adventures. And that way, if you had 4 hours, you could just play all 4 of them. But if you only had an hour, you'd play 1 of them. Or if you only had 2 hours, you'd play 2 of them. Nice. And then with DDAL in 5th edition, they started explicitly commissioning 2-hour adventures. And I think that was a good change. I personally had a very hard time writing for it. I legendarily wrote an adventure for the Ravenloft season called The Tempter, which was supposed to be a 2-hour adventure, and I delivered about 20 hours worth of material.
Whoops.
Which they had to cut back into an appendix.
You didn't want that extra 0 after?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you wanted an entire season of Gothicar, not 2 hours of Gothicar. So it's a challenge. Yeah, it can be a challenge to write just as much as it is a challenge to run.
Well, was this changed like in the last like 5-10 years or something like that?
Yeah, with 5e was when
okay.
It flipped over to D&D Adventurers League.
Gotcha. I remember. Sean, I remember it happened in 4E with the Adventurers League. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're right. Yeah, I was talking about the intros when we would have a new storyline season or a new book adventure. We would do those kind of 1-hour mini adventures, and then the Delve was always a huge hit at conventions.
Honestly, the Delve sounds like a blast.
Yeah, they would just set up a giant, Dwarven Forge dungeon, and you would come up and you would get your DM, and you would get through 3 or 4 rooms in the dungeon, and have a good time.
Yeah, playing with my kids because I'm so busy during the day. I have learned that you can play a meaningful encounter in half an hour.
Yeah.
You just need, I mean, this is a good transition into the adventure path, because we always play adventure paths with my kids, and a lot of times those encounters take half an hour. So we're like, all right, remember what happened last time? Yep, cool. All right, this is the next chapter. This is the next encounter. So we play for half an hour, and then we move on. So what is great about something like that is that it relieves a lot of pressure off of everyone. It's not like, all right, we have to sit down and we're going to commit a long time. No, it's just like, yeah, let's go grab your dice. And because it's a Paizo adventure path, I'll print off the map. Boop, 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 boop. All right, let's go. Cool, we're done.
I also think that's really handy for like someone like me who doesn't have a lot of gamer friends in my area. And so I just have all my friends over. Like, yeah, let's just hang out. Let's have food. It's going to be great. Oh, we want to play a board game? How about we do a 30-minute RPG session? It's going to take just as long as a board game will. I've got all the dice.
Actually,
Let's go.
less time than a board game.
Yeah, depending on the board game, you can easily spend. If it's
I shoot for ones that last 30 minutes.
Okay, gotcha. All right. So this is actually a great transition into adventure paths, or the thing that most people do, which is play adventures off the shelf from their local store. Obviously, the advantage of this is that you're not under any time constraints. So if you only get through 2 encounters that night, that's okay. So you're not as pressured to go, and you can take your time. The way I prep for those personally, I'll be frank, I don't prep for them as much as I do for a convention game, as Sean was talking about, because I really like the point you brought up about how you might run a convention game 6 times. So there is a huge return on investment for really, really prepping that one adventure, right? Like if I get my Dwarven Forge set up, I might take rubber cement and glue it down because it's worth it, because I'm going to run it 6 times. Why not have a Dwarven Forge thing set up? And because it's going to be a massive return on investment. And then every time I run the adventure, I'll learn little mistakes and get better each time. But if you're at home, you don't have that luxury. You're gonna the one time that you run it is probably the only time that you'll run it. So I do prep, I do set up dungeons and things like that, but I'm a little bit more loose and free. But part of the fun of that is, just as I was saying, there is that prep. Our good friend Brett King creates these massive and elaborate dioramas for his players to move their minis on. And the reason he does that is because, they're amazing. Is because the adventure's set up a certain way. He knows what he's doing, and so for a pre-written adventure, the GM can really, really take their time and do something like that. That I would thoroughly encourage game masters to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I split it. So I look at what are going to be the big set pieces, because if you know that you're going to run multiple chapters, or something's going to spread out over multiple sessions, you still have that element of time management, because you always want your group to leave excited about what's going to happen at the next session, because the number one enemy of continuity in gaming is getting everybody back together. Same bat time, same bat channel. That's now we're moving from something that takes 4 hours to something that might take 20 hours, or something that might take 2.5 months. And so you want to make sure that everybody's excited about coming back to the table to see what happens next. And so I try to really have one really big set piece that's going to happen in every session. And I'll make sure that I've got the minis, I've got the maps, I've got the terrain, I've got everything laid out for that. And then if there are other ancillary encounters, I may have some of that stuff ready to go. But like you said, I don't have a basement that can support 3 acres of pre-set up Dwarven Forge, nor do I have a bank account that can support owning 3 acres of Dwarven Forge. And so the focus on the one really big, the dragon fight, let's say, I'm going to make sure that thing is over the top as I can make it. And then the encounters that feed into that are going to be a little bit more theater of the mind. But you have the advantage. It's your you're the game master, therefore you know what's coming and the players don't. And so you can make sure that you're, and then if they decided they didn't want to fight the dragon that day, now I've got a giant elaborate set piece that I've got to figure out what to do with, right?
One of the really great advantages of running, let's say, an adventure path where you can look way down the line is that, so for example, a lot of adventures talk about how you find this old journal and it's got dozens of pages about the bad guy, and what is offered, I mean, and I'm being very literal about this because I'm running an adventure like that right now, is a little handout about this big. Mm-hmm. That's the quote unquote dungeon, dozens of pages. And so often what happens is that what that means is your game master is going to read some box text to you or kind of summarize all this information about the bad guy while you listen, and then maybe give you a handout. What I've literally done is I've made the journal that you find, and I made sure there were like about a dozen pages in it. Mm-hmm. Now, to keep myself from writing a novel that no one's going to read, I made it small. I made the font big, and it was 12 pages, but and it was attractive, and it was something that people could hold and look at and that sort of thing. But that sort of prep. So I talked about the dioramas and the props. Is the advantage of playing like a long-term adventure path is that you can really get super elaborate with certain things. Journals be among them, because, for example, in a game that I'm going to play later today, I put in the journals the strengths and weaknesses of the bad guys, so they can actually refer to them and like kind of get clues as to what to do and that sort of thing. And plus, you can also do things with invisible ink or heat-sensitive ink.
There are places so cool. I love when people do that.
There's places online you can get it very easily, yeah. And then you tell the players, like, you give them a clue, and you're like, oh, you have to apply fire to the scroll, and use a lighter, and then do all that. There's pens that light up with if you have UV light. Mm-hmm. You can do all those sorts of things because, again, you know what's happening, as opposed to, say, like a 100% improv game. Well, 100% improv games are great and wonderful, but you may not know what's happening ahead of time enough to prep those amazing things.
Yes, no, I agree. I love props. I will go out of my way to get the best props that I can for the adventure path. Had a Call of Cthulhu game one time where I knew that there was going to be a big reveal of a who had been a murderer, and so I wrote on my forearm with soap the name of the murderer, and then I had them burn the paper on which the confession was written, and then rub it on the corpse's arm, and the ash sticks to the soap, and you get the reveal that way. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do. There are folks out there like the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society, the Beadle and Grimm folks, a lot of folks on Etsy make amazing stuff that you can use. And these days, I have to say, the quality of the handouts that are in most professional products these days is really high compared to what it used to be. So if you're using a virtual tabletop, you're very likely going to get high resolution images of the player handouts, the player maps. People are doing maps with layers now, so you can have the player's version of the map and the DM's version. You're going to get great NPC portraits. I love NPC portraits. I've got an iPad. I'll just pinch and zoom out of the adventure, and being able to see the person that they're talking to is incredibly immersive. So.
I agree very much that just really quick, Abby.
Yeah, go ahead.
Showing that picture, that solidifies the NPCs in their mind.
Mm-hmm. Like, one thing I always feel compelled to say when it comes to like props is, and this is on my mind too, because I was listening to NADPOD's Dungeon Court, where a very similar situation kind of happened. Because I know my hangback of getting props is like, but what if they don't do that? What if that prop is wasted because they didn't do the thing? That's okay. Put the prop in their way. You had it underneath the rug. They didn't look under the rug. That's fine. Put it on the shelf that they did look at. It's okay. Just move it. It's fine.
Yep.
It was over here and they didn't talk to that person. Don't worry about it. They didn't go and get that cool little talisman for the tree later. Drop it on the rose. Someone just, seems useless. Whatever. Put it in their way.
I agree very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole debate of railroading versus, going wherever the players go, it's both. Like
Yeah.
everybody wants the story to be good, and so you're going to roll with whatever wacky decisions the players make, but they're still going to get the clues that they need to get and find the things that they need to find to end up in the place where they need to be.
Yeah. You don't have to railroad your players. You do have to railroad your stuff.
Exactly.
Right.
Your stuff follows the players.
Oh,
You have this little cute little mini that you've made, and you're so proud of it. And this little mini's just off in the corner, like, look at me. Wait, no, look at me. Wait, I'm here. I'm right here.
Yes.
About that and prep, and just what you said, Abby, there have been, because I allow the dice to take part in the story, there have definitely been moments where I'm like, I spent a long time painting up this gorgeous mini, and it dies in about a round.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, they're gone.
I'll just put him over here with his own little tombstone so that we can still look at him.
Yes, I've definitely experienced the 20-hour painting investment for a thing that dies in the second round. But what are you going to do?
Yep.
Reuse. Who knows?
Yeah. We're fighting this guy again. Yeah, well,
some little mini over here that you haven't found yet is casting Revivify, I guess.
Turns out there were triplet dragons. But that is a thing.
My twin.
Absolutely, yes. I will have vengeance for my 17 brothers. But a thing that you can do in an adventure path or in any recurring campaign that you cannot easily do in a one shot is you can call back to things that happened earlier in previous sessions, and that is a huge advantage that you have. Not everything has to be resolved and dealt with and put in its place on the shelf, because there's going to be a next time and there's going to be a time after that. And so I always have kind of my list of dangling plot threads. I try to put stuff out there that is more stuff than the players can reasonably consume in the course of the session. A, I'm curious what they're going to pick, but B, I like there to be some things that we can circle back around to later, or the things that they don't pick, time passes, the story's going to develop in those areas, and now it has morphed into something that's bigger or more dangerous or more interesting than it was. We didn't have time to go deal with the goblins that were raiding the trade route, and so now the goblins have taken down so many caravans that the village is starving. There's a lot you can do in terms of continuity, not just with the things that do happen, but also with the things that don't happen.
So we brought up railroading at one point, and one thing that people are very, like you said, Sean, a lot of beginning game masters even, they want to write their own stuff because they feel like if they run something pre-published, they're not doing it right, or etc., or it's a crutch. And then a lot of people are also worried. Beginners are a lot of worried about adventures because they feel that it's going to be a railroad. A really well-written module will have a hook that will be almost irresistible, and anybody in that adventure would want to do it. So my classic example is the Return to the Tomb of Horrors. I told everybody the hook of this adventure is so good it honestly doesn't matter what alignment you are. They're like, what? And then they find out the hook is, if you don't do the thing, not only will you die, all your family and friends will die, but all of you will be turned into undead, and all of you will lose your identity. You will all become Acererak. Everybody in the entire multiverse. And so if you're incredibly evil, the multiverse will become incredibly boring for you. And by the way, your identity will be erased.
You can't have an alignment if you don't have an identity.
So when the players found this out, they were like, no, that's a great hook. I'm doing the thing. They were pretty set. So if the module or adventure is written real well, what I guess I'm trying to say is that it won't feel like a railroad. It'll feel like, well, no, my character is going to do this because they have a very good reason to do this.
Yeah. And another advantage that you have in that environment, whether it's an adventure path in a campaign world or a series of adventures that you're stringing together, the players should be the player characters should be connected to the world and to the story in some way that they may or may not be in the context of a one shot. In a
Right.
one shot, the Baron is hiring you to go clear out the dungeon. I guess we're coin operated, so we're going to do it. But in an ongoing game, hey, this is our town. These are our friends and family that are being threatened. I'm connected to the story because this is my church that my cleric is a part of. I'm connected to the world because this is my grove that I grew up in as a young druid and tended. And so you always have that luxury of being able to have those hooks, even if the adventure hook itself doesn't compel everybody. There's almost always a story reason that will get them invested in the adventure.
And with any game, whether it's a one shot or a campaign or a pre-made or a homebrew, there is a level of player buy-in that you kind of just have to trust. Because like the player who is just like the reluctant hero to the point of being like, okay, well, I don't want to do that. It's sort of like, why am I traveling with these people? Because you want to play D&D. That's why you're traveling with these people.
Right,
like,
right.
You have to have some level of buy-in, even if it's just, I want to have fun with my friends, some level. And like, you can have a reluctant hero, but your reluctant hero can't constantly be not participating. Your reluctant hero has to be like, okay, fine, I guess I'll help.
Right. Yes.
Like there's a way to
if everybody goes off to the beach for the day, then it's a very short session.
Yeah, it's weird when you have like a 4-player group and 3 of them are like, yeah, let's do it, and the one person's like, but I don't wanna, so I'm gonna stay here.
Okay.
There's a great write-up in the first edition 7th Sea Game Master's Guide by John Wick, who talks about that very issue, and he's like, when you're being a player character, it's incumbent upon you to weave, bend, rewrite your backstory so that you're motivated to do the adventure, because otherwise it's a group effort. You're going to weigh down the group. And also you're going to ask other people to compromise what their characters are. So if you're like, well, that's what my character would do. Somebody else might be like, well, what my character honestly would do would be to leave you behind. They would just walk off. And so,
and now there are where that works, but that's when everyone has that same attitude about it.
Right. And so if you play the reluctant hero, you're asking other people to compromise their character. So instead of doing that, make it a group effort and find some way your character is motivated to do whatever the thing is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I had a character. We did we were a band of like various types of thieves that were stealing a dragon egg. That was the whole plot. And so we all wanted it for our own reasons. And then when we were running away from the dragon, one of them got left behind. And I was kind of like, okay, is this character going to get left behind? And my character went and saved them, not because of any altruism, because like in general, yeah, they would just be like, all right, bye. But because she was a cleric and was basically like, based on the Borgias and was like a cleric politico, was like, it will be beneficial to me in the future if I save you, and then you can like spread my good reputation around. So I'm going to save you for myself later.
Absolutely.
So it was very selfish, but it still worked because it had the party gel.
Enlightened self-interest is always a reliable motivation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I rarely, I've played with thousands and thousands of people over the years, and I could probably name a single-digit number of times where somebody was just like, I don't,
just the rain cloud.
I'm just here to be a stick in the mud,
Yeah.
But you do find in a given session that a player may be engaged to a greater or lesser degree. And so,
yeah, of course,
especially when you have like a sandbox style adventure, maybe the thing that they really wanted to do wasn't the thing that the rest of the group really wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so in between sessions, you want to check in with that player and go, okay, what can we do to make sure that the thing that person wanted to do does come back around, so that everybody kind of gets a chance to have their itch scratched. And most people will happily go along with the group. The spotlight is going to be shared equally by everybody over the long run, but in a particular adventure, the character with the social skills may shine this week. The character that can tank 27 orcs single-handedly may shine over here. And so I think as long as you're checking in with the players and letting them know that you see what's happening, people will be happy to provide that kind of social acquiescence to do the thing that maybe isn't the thing that in their character most wanted to do.
Yeah. And similar to that, one thing with modules and pre-mades that was a big shift for me along my GM journey was I don't want to run modules because I'm afraid that people will be like, well, that's not how I played it before. And it won't be fun. But then as I started playing more and running more, I was like, wait a minute, no, it's actually going to be, but wait, that's how we did it. And that's so cool that you did it this other way.
Yes. Yeah, you can pull that off. There is enormous fun in getting to play something first and then getting to run it later.
For the second time, the first time, the second time. Yeah,
absolutely. And it just makes you a better game master for that particular adventure anyway, because now you've seen it from the other side, and so you know that the 12-paragraph monologue that the villain reads is too boring for the players to sit there and listen to, and so you're going to paraphrase, you're going to trim that down, you're going to make it a little punchier.
Yeah,
for sure.
Okay, well, that's all the time that we have today. Thank you guys for tuning in and listening to us talk about how to run pre-written adventures. So if anything else, I'll leave you with this. Dice were rolled, roles were played, play was fun, and what else is there in life if not play? We'll see you next time.